Okay, I'm hollowing down in this section of the form here. You can see where the water's starting to come out of the form as I hollow. This is probably the most dangerous area to hollow, and the tendency to go through walls is right here in this transition where you're starting to really transition from the wider curve up here to the more narrow curve toward the bottom here. So you have to be very careful and pretty picky about your measurements down here as you go. Stop often and make sure that you're not too thin on the walls in this area here. At this point I'm at the very end of the hollowing stages. I'm just finishing the bottom, and I've switched to a round scraper bit, sharpened at a fairly steep angle, just like the rest of the bits, and you can see that it's round, and it just mounts to the bar with a screw on a straight bar, and it's actually oriented in the tool, there you go, at 45 degrees or close to there, so that it will be cutting on a shear sort of bias against the edge of the hollow form. I'm just going to try to finish the lower half and clean up the bottom with this tool, envisioning essentially where the bottom's going to be and bottoming out at the drilled hole that I started with at the beginning. When you get to the very bottom of the form, there's often a little nub at the very center that's usually a pain to get rid of. So I've switched back to the straight bit, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to find it very lightly. I'm going to go just below it. I'm going to come up, and then I'm going to move my tool to the left and back to the center. And I'm going to do that over and over, and hopefully it'll disappear. Right over here, look. Looks like we got it. Okay, the final thing that I have to do before spinning this piece around into a friction chuck is to measure where the bottom is and mark it along the outside. So I'll stick a straight tool in here, just sight down the opening, mark it with my thumb, do the same on the outside. Make a pencil mark, and that'll give me the indication of where the bottom is, so that I can turn it around and complete the bottom. At this point, after the hollowing, the piece is dry enough to do some rough sanding on, so I'm going to go ahead and do that before I turn it around. Just get most of the rough grits done, and then we'll probably finish sanding it off the lathe. Turn the speed down on the lathe and go to town. Okay, this piece is now sanded to 220, and it's time to turn it around into a friction chuck and finish the bottom, and I can finish the rest of the sanding off the lathe. Going to mount a friction chuck into the chuck. This is just turned with a little bit of a concave recess that I'll pad, and that'll receive the top of the form, and we'll mount the bottom of the form with the same center hole that we started with, so we know it will run true. And you just want to give it enough pressure to allow a friction drive without putting too much pressure on the top of the form. A little bit out of round now because it's started to dry. Just try to get that centered as best we can. Using my finger as a gauge on the tool rest so I can see where it's out. There we go. So the remainder of the cuts need to be fairly light so that we don't risk knocking the piece off the lathe. One thing we want to do is we want to measure from a fixed location, and I'm going to use the edge of my tailstock here, my live center in the tailstock, to the line that we marked that's the bottom, so we could replace the line if necessary if we turn it away, and I've got 2 inches to the line exactly. So now it's just a matter of turning away the bottom. So you can see the line here that represents the internal bottom of the form, and there's some additional material here below that. I'm going to leave a little bit of extra material there, smooth this and blend it into the original line to keep the form continuous, the form's line continuous down to the foot. But I'm going to leave the extra material here so that I can remount this on this little nub after the form is completely dry and true the foot. What I'll do though in the meantime is I will narrow this nub down to a very fine point to minimize any propensity for it to crack. Okay, just a little final shear scraping to completely blend that, then I'll sand it to 320 to match the top, and we'll put it aside to dry. So after some final sanding to blend the top and the bottom, that's the final form. Feels pretty good in terms of its weight. It's a little hard to tell. We'll set it aside to dry at this point, put it in a paper bag and let it dry, and just kind of keep monitoring its weight, and it should be dry fairly quickly, given that it's about 1/4 inch, 3/16 to 1/4 inch thick.